Welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by M.A. Taylor, director of The Creepy Line.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
All right, perfect. So let's talk a little bit about how you first got involved in film and how your career began.
Well, I am actually a fine arts guy by training, so I actually did a lot of video work in the late 90s into the early 2000s, and I realized that unlike a lot of the fine arts, the new digital arts had a lot of applied kind of ways to make income, actually, making commercials and doing things like that. So I kind of scooted from doing video art over into commercial work and eventually documentaries. And so I started doing long form. I did some work with the military channel in Washington, D.C., and just kind of kept going from there and developed my own style and kind of topics I liked. And that brings us to The Creepy Line.
And what were some films that you worked on before The Creepy Line, or your most recent one before this?
I had worked on a film called Clinton Cash about the Clinton Foundation. And I had done a film in Argentina, but for the most part, those were kind of the big projects that I had done. The Clinton Cash took a while, and then Creepy Line took a year. So those are the big projects that I've been working on.
Yeah, I remember when Clinton Cash came out. Like I remember that was like a big thing. I mean, I remember seeing it like on Breitbart. Breitbart, and I feel like even Drudge, like they were running stories about it, which I was like, oh, this is really interesting.
Yeah, it was a big splash. It was definitely picked up by Bernie Sanders supporters, and it was released at Cannes Film Festivals where it was shown. And I think it picked up, multiple millions of views eventually, and it's still kind of quoted to present day.
What do you think Hillary or Bill Clinton would say if they met you in person?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure it wouldn't be. Look, here's the thing: the film it's not really a partisan piece. It's more about it's more about the foundation. And so, if they're, I prefer going after entities that, are not doing good for the people. So I think that, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, we see these as, whether it's the Clinton Foundation or Google or Facebook, is, undermining democracy is really kind of the topic that's more interesting to me versus partisan politics.
Oh, that totally makes sense. Well, yeah, let's get into the Creepy Line. So, like in a nutshell, what is this film about, and I guess what are you trying to communicate to audiences about this?
The Creepy Line is about how these large kind of tech companies, and we primarily look at Google mostly and then Facebook as well, have the ability and have amassed the ability through basically our opting in by using their free platforms to undermine democracy. That's the primary message, and the film breaks down a number of ways in how they can do that, whether it be your privacy, whether it be manipulating their customers, or even playing in politics when they shouldn't be. And so that's really what it exposes. And again, it's a nonpartisan piece. It has Democrats and Republicans and independents and foreigners, and it's really there to jumpstart the conversation about what does it all mean that we take all these things and these companies have amassed all this power. In the EU, they've been talking about this for a very long time. So we are actually behind on this conversation. And so the film doesn't really put forth any solutions, because I personally think that we have to start over and think of new solutions for the future. But it starts the conversation, and that's really what it's designed to do.
So the film is called The Creepy Line. I guess what are some things that are creepy that Google knows about you, for example? Because I feel like a lot of, let's say you're a lay person that kind of has an idea that, these tech companies are very big. They have all this information about me. I feel like that they might have that idea, but it's very nebulous. They might just think to themselves, okay, well, Google knows that it saved my password for whatever account, right? That would,
Hmm.
like, I think they might think something like that. But what is actually some of the creepier stuff that Google actually knows about people when they're using their platform?
Well, the thing about it is that Google knows everything. I would argue Google knows things about you that you don't know about yourself. You when you interact with their platforms, and really the Google search engine is kind of the big one that everyone interacts with all the time. You're asking Google things or telling Google things that you would never tell your spouse, your best friend, or anybody really. All of your dirty laundry is usually aired through Google, whether you're looking for naughty material or looking up sicknesses or stalking somebody or looking up what do you want to buy, what are ingredients, what car to buy, where to take your pet. I mean, these are all basically scraps of information that about your life. And Google collects all of this information, and they collect it even when you're not interacting. So if, let's say, you have an Android phone and you go to the store and you bought X amount of items and you used Google Pay, or Google Wallet, I'm sorry, and you kind of, they tracked your location, they tracked when you stopped, they tracked what you messaged, they tracked what you searched when you were sitting in traffic waiting for the light to change. They have collected all of this information and have created what I would say is probably the most thorough profile on what your impulses are, what you're going to do, and then they take that information and they sell it to advertisers, in some instances governments, and even in some instances law enforcement. And so at the end of the day, you are actually the product. You're the thing they sell. These are surveillance platforms. And so while that's kind of it's creepy that they watch you like that, the real creepy part is that what do they do with that information once they have it? And what they do with it is they use it to manipulate you, to push you in one direction or another. And that could be through anything from obviously selling to advertisers, which is the obvious one, but also how your search returns come back. If I want to look for something and they want me to go in a certain direction, they have the power to show me only the things they want to show me to make me do what, and they know I'm going to do it because they collected all the information. So that's kind of the broad abstract of what's creepy about them. Of course, you can break down a number of things that they do that are creepy, whether it's, you walk into a store and all of a sudden something pops up on your phone saying, hey, like you should get some eggs right now, which is partially something that sounds cool, but no one asks themselves, how did they even know I was there? How did they know I need eggs? Like, how did they know all this stuff? And we basically just keep using the platforms, giving them the information, and fueling their machine.
If Google, let's just say for sake of argument, if Google was going to be broken up, let's just say, how many different companies do you think actually would exist as a result of a breakup? Because I've thought about this before. I feel like there's Google the search engine, right? And everybody thinks about Google the search engine, but they don't consider the fact that Google is like the largest internet place for like companies to advertise with through Google AdWords. There's Google Analytics, which is the most popularly used form of tracking how many people visit your website and all that data. Then they own YouTube. Like in my mind, I think it's like, wow, this is almost like 4 companies in one.
Well, I would say that there are actually hundreds of companies. I mean, they buy 2 companies a week practically. I would say I'm kind of I don't think that Google should be broken up. I think that we don't know the implications of breaking them up because, as you said, they are 90% of search in the world. Their analytics are on every website. They've mapped huge parts of the internet, but then there's also the other side of the company that's actually more dangerous about breaking them up, and that's they work with the federal government. There's parts of the Pentagon will sit on Google servers. Apple Mail sits on Google servers. Most media sits on Google servers. So there's a whole bunch of infrastructure that Google has put out that we're all sitting on top of that is basically completely intertwined with our. Can you imagine if you had a car and Android is running the GPS? or your cell phones or communications or education, all the things that they're in. So there's the things we can see and there's the things that we can't see. And so we are going to have to literally start over and say, okay, where are they invested in? And if you pull them out or you break them in half, will it cause parts of the actual economy extent in which they've moved out? And I don't think most people realize where they are, which is pretty much everywhere.
When do you think that Google kind of crossed the line between being just another search engine that was maybe, more efficient or better than the other ones that existed at the time? Like, when did Google cross that line into, basically creating a surveillance state that, would have made, like, the Stasi jealous? Like, when did that kind of line get crossed, I guess?
I mean, there's some people who would argue that it was from the beginning. I mean, it is, known that the Central Intelligence Agency, the intelligence community was very interested in Google in the early days, very interested in what they were working on. The FBI and these other guys were very kind of invested in the mapping of the internet to, whether it's for national security or fighting crime or whatever. DARPA is a term that comes up fairly frequently when you talk about the early days of Google. So I think in some ways that has always been in the DNA to surveil. Now, maybe the intention was not to surveil for bad causes or evil causes or any of these kinds of things, and I'm sure it wasn't in those early days. But things have changed, and they are essentially a monopoly in these spaces. And so you have an entity that has a vision of the world, and they have the capabilities of actually executing that vision. And I think that in our democracy, we need transparency to know what they're up to. But I think it's always really been there since day one. It just wasn't there in the state that it is now.
And what year would you say that Google really started building up a user base? Was that like 2003 or 2004?
I mean, I remember, Google kind of popping in the early 2000s. Yeah, it's probably around then. I mean, again, we stated in the film that the big changes in the tech community were the rise of Facebook and, of course, the introduction of the iPhone. Which changed the context of how we use things. So one of the things was that, and Luther Lowe states this in our film very well, that Google wanted to, get you out into the internet and surfing around and doing things. But Facebook had changed the context by saying, no, we want you to stay here, and we want your activity to happen in one place as opposed to going out. So Google changed their platforms to start accommodating this new business model. And so if they couldn't get you on the search, then they got you on Chrome. And if they couldn't get you on Chrome, then they got you on Android. And so they expanded their kind of reach through these platforms. And again, with the rise of smartphones, it was a lot easier for them to kind of noodle into you. So in some ways, it wasn't even them that really pioneered the platforms that allowed them to reach you, at the pool or on the beach. It was other companies, but they very quickly kind of moved into those spaces. And again, I think Facebook and the iPhone were large components to that reach.
Do you feel like the Patriot? Do you feel like the Patriot Act? Do you feel like that? Oh, sorry about that. Do you feel like the Patriot Act actually helped to expedite this surveillance level of Google? Like, do you feel like if the Patriot Act, if it never were to happen, let's say, do you think that there would have been more pushback or concern about the surveillance nature of Google?
I think with the Patriot Act, it's a misunderstood piece of legislation. I mean, I think we have to look back at the time when you had 9/11 and the rise of these platforms. These platforms largely had no restrictions. And in a way, the Patriot Act actually gave users rights, right? I mean, at the time, you couldn't tap a phone and wiretapping, you had to get a warrant. But what was the laws based on electronic, communications and Messenger and at the time AOL? And so what these what the Patriot Act at least began was the idea of saying, well, what are your rights on an electronic platform like email? I would say Patriot Act probably did more for the actual user, and it can be debated left and right about where it extended maybe in other places, and have no comment on any of that, but I think specifically for digital platforms, it began kind of the conversation about what are your rights, because at the time, what was the regulations on email? Like, what was the idea of like looking at your email? There was no laws. Nobody knew what it was. It was brand new. It was kind of like the early days of Bitcoin, where people were just creating coins, and now the SEC has come in and changed all that. So I think the Patriot Act was the beginning of changing of that. Now, of course, I believe all technology, for every upside, and this is with legislation as well, you have downside. So Patriot Act had downside as well, but it did start to define our rights as users on platforms that were brand new. And of course, technology moves so quickly, you can have a new platform every week. And the government simply can't move nearly as fast as the Silicon Valley. So it becomes very difficult to add regulations for new communications constantly. So I think the Patriot Act would get tweaks from year to year to kind of try do their best to accommodate that. And of course, our legislators aren't always up to date on what's going on. So it's a mixed bag, I think.
Well, because with your rights right now, let's say you have a Gmail account. I mean, does Google have the right or the ability to comb through your emails right now?
Oh, they do it. It's not that. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Google has the right to own anything you do on any platform you touch of theirs. That includes Google Analytics, and you could never touch a Google product. And you're getting swept up if you're on a website by Google. If you talk on the Android phone, all of that behavior, your voice, your messages, your Google search, it's in the print. They own it. They collected it. They read emails you don't even send. So if you write an email in Gmail, don't send it, they have it. They collected it. If you have email services that sit on Google servers, they have it. That includes the New York Times and other various press outlets, Fox, everybody. Everybody's on a Google server. The parts of the government are on Google servers and use Gmail and use Google Docs and various things. They have it, they own it, they collect it, and it's all it's all organized and that's the thing. What do they do with it? Well, we don't know, and that's really kind of the fundamental issue here. So yeah, if you use a Google product, I mean, Apple has kind of taken this stance, and they've tried to take advantage of the situation by saying, when they had the latest iOS update, they said, oh, your privacy and your data, it's all yours. But Apple Mail was revealed to sit on Google servers, so hence it's really not that safe either. Or Yahoo will refer to Google's quarantine list when you do a search, so you're still hitting a Google product when you use Yahoo. So that's the thing. A lot of people don't realize the underpinnings of a bunch of other technologies that you would think are competitors are actually sitting on top of Google technology. And that's, very concerning when you kind of think of the marketplace.
So does the same thing apply for MSN with Bing and with like Hotmail or whatever? Like, do they also do the same thing where they collect all that data through your emails?
They are, well, it's interesting because Bing and Dr. Robert Epstein, who actually is provided the backbone of information for our film, speaks about a deal that, obviously Microsoft was suing Google. Obviously, there were all these wars happening where everybody was suing everybody for IP. And one day, Google and Microsoft signed a big deal, and all of a sudden, all lawsuits are called off, and Bing works much better. So again, Bing is probably referencing Google technology. And Google spends, I think, something like $3 billion a year to make sure that Safari on your phone's search is defaulting to Google. And so, again, these other platforms like Microsoft but again, Microsoft, you have to remember, Microsoft and Apple have different business models than Google and Facebook. Apple and Microsoft sell things to you, right? They sell a phone, like, the iPad just was announced this week. And the thing is, if I don't like the iPad, I won't spend $1,800 for it. So Apple has to accommodate their customers Microsoft sells Windows and sells Office and sells these other services, and so it's a classic kind of buyer company relationship. But Google and Facebook, they're different. They sell you. And so they don't have to do anything or accommodate you because you use the products, you use them, you opted in, you signed up. So Microsoft and Apple have more incentive to not upset you, and not sit there and spy on you or have that kind of reputation, because then you just won't use their products. But how do you get away from Google search? I mean, it's nearly impossible to get away from Google. It's totally possible to get away from Microsoft and Apple.
Yeah. Well, I guess this kind of leads to another question I have is that, I mean, I've heard in the past that when there's been data breaches, that individuals have sued the company that's been breached, right? Like, I'm trying to think of an exact example, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. Like, I know LinkedIn's been hacked and things like that. Let's just say, for sake of argument, that somebody was able to hack Google and they had access to, whatever, 200 million Gmail accounts or whatever, right? Or they had access to, a million YouTube uploaders, right? They had access to their information. Mm-hmm. Would Google be able to be sued in that situation?
Currently, I'm not sure about what the regulatory kind of avenue is for suing them. In that respect. I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of lawsuit that can be brought up. But I mean, here's the thing, like Google gets sued constantly, and they basically, put out massive amounts of money just to pay people off. And then I think the problem is with Google and with Facebook is that, and again, a difference between them and say Microsoft and Apple is they're always caught doing bad things. They're always caught with the data breaches. I mean, we've had how many data breaches in the last month alone between the two companies? One with Google Plus, and then of course Facebook had their users. This is happening constantly. They're constantly being hacked. They're constantly having everybody's information stolen. This is happening all the time. Yet we continue to use these products. I mean, if this was any other product in the world, and you had this many issues with it, you just wouldn't use it. And so they have in no way earned our trust with the most intimate information in your life. They just haven't. And so, the bigger issue, of course, is also censorship. That's the other thing. And there's a Supreme Court case that's moving up through the chain right now that could actually give users the right to sue Google for being censored on their platform, and that will change everything. So there's a lot of kind of nuances to how you can sue Google, and but a lot of the times, they just pay insane fines, and I'm talking like in some instances, hundreds of millions of dollar fines, especially in Europe.
Well, like from a practical standpoint, let's say for people in the United States, is there an actual functional way to use the internet without having to interact with Google?
Currently, not really. No, I mean, you can try to use another browser, DuckDuckGo or something like that, but that's not even really a browser. You can try to use Start Page. When it comes to search, there's really no alternative, and you can try, but if you need productivity, look, there's nothing wrong with the products. They work awesome. That's why they have such huge market share. It's not an issue that they don't work. They work exceptionally well. But you can not use Android. You can not use Gmail. You could use Proton Mail or something else. You could use Signal. There's other alternatives for their various smaller platforms. But again, you could be searching the internet and you're still bumping up against Google cookies and analytics. You're still bumping up against these things because remember, it's free. They give all these things away for free, and that's kind of how they get you hooked. So everybody, remember back in the day, I'm going to send you an invite for Gmail, and everybody got an invite for Gmail, and then everybody got Gmail, and then it's like 40 or 45% of the market now. And then but it links in with your Google Docs, and that's free. You don't have to spend $600 for Microsoft Office, which is still a superior product, but it's hard. If you're a student, it's free. And so after a while, they unified all of their services into the one login, which was an idea that upset a lot of people. But that meant if they didn't like you on YouTube, you'd lose all of your services. And so the thing is can you get away? Not really. This is another issue we take with them, that like, why can't I get away from this company? Why can't I just live my life if I don't want to interact with Google? And so I already have to interact with the government all the time and everybody else. So like, now Google is like there all the time and I can't separate. Facebook's different because, for the bad things they do, you cannot use Facebook. That is true. You can get away from Facebook. You don't have to interact with Facebook. But I don't see any alternative for getting away from Google. We used Google to make the creepy line. I mean, you gotta, people are like, oh, did you not use it? I mean, look, we did experiments that we tried. Dr. Robert Epstein does not use Google. He uses VPNs and various things. But it's very hard to conduct your business and not use Google. Can you imagine not having a website on Google search for your business? You would get no business, which goes back to like, who gave these guys the right to determine whether you get business or not, on their search engine. Well, so that's the overreach part.
I mean, you're right. There's so many things to unpack from what you just said. I mean, it's first off, somebody that would say something like, oh, why don't you just not use Google? I mean, it'd be equivalent to saying somebody that, let's say, is very libertarian, it'd be equivalent to telling them, like, never interact with the government, and that means don't drive on roads. It means drive on,
you nailed it. Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah, you can't not do it, and that's a problem. I mean, look, it's different, obviously, like, the government is the government, but Google is not the government. I mean, like, I'm not a citizen of Google, I'm a citizen of the United States. I pay my taxes. I like nice roads and clean water, but I'm not a citizen of Google. I never signed up. I don't use Google things, but yet I'm a citizen of Google, so I never even had the option to not be at this point in time.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's so many, exactly. There's so many things about that that's totally true. I mean, with like you said, with the government, I mean, there's an element of, there's accountability. You actually know who's representing you. I mean, I would venture to say that not even 1% of the American population can name the head of Google. And I bet only a couple percent could even name the guys that created it.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, it's interesting when people bring up the government and they compare the government to Google. And I say, look, Google is a government, right? They control, but they have no accountability to the people. The government, by design, by the founding fathers' design, was designed to be inefficient, so they can't do crazy things, right? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things in the news about the Constitution these days, right? And the question is, can you do that? Well, that's why it was designed to be inefficient. Google is not inefficient. Imagine a government that can do what it wants with no inefficiencies and no restrictions. That is essentially what they are. And we are their citizens, and they're not accountable to us because it's not a normal consumer environment. It's not like Apple is, if we don't like their products, we don't buy them. Their HomePod didn't sell that great. It's cool, but people are like, we're going with something else. And so they're going to redesign it and do something else. I mean, I don't know, maybe they will, I don't know. But I'm just saying that's the model they function under. Or Honda, or anybody, people who make toilet paper, like everybody has this relationship with their customers except for Google and Facebook.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, what would you say to people that, I mean, I guess this comes more to the censorship level. Like, what do you say to people when they tell you, like, well, Google, they're a private corporation, so shouldn't they be allowed to do whatever they want to? So let's say, you have a website, and for whatever reason they say, we're going to not have it indexed anymore. Meaning that you're not going to be able to be found in searches. Like, what would you say to somebody that says, oh, well, they're a private company, shouldn't they be able to do whatever they want to?
Yeah, so that, and I hear this constantly, right? Oh, they're a private company, so on and so forth. I think in the context of how people understand them, they are a private company, but in the context of what they are, they're almost not like a private company. They're almost like a public utility. They're almost like a state. This is what this new Supreme Court case is about, like whether a radio station that's public can fire people and they can sue the state. And, this brings all these various organizations kind of into this idea of like, of censorship. I would say this to answer that question. The easiest way is that, look, if you're on their platform, sure, they can do whatever they want, with the exception that they do get an exemption in the Common Decency Act under CDA 230 that says that in order for them to not be liable for things that people do on their platforms, they can't actually alter the content. Right. So if you're a media company like New York Times or Fox News or whatever, you are liable for what people say on your platform. If I write an op-ed in the New York Times and it really offends people, New York Times can be sued. Google and Facebook are exempt from that under the basis that they're not altering the content. So the minute they come in and start censoring things, they are no longer exempt from that. Right. So, yes, they're a private company, but they are a private company that operates like media companies, and media companies are regulated in this country. And so that's number one. Number two is that if they are going to play in any kind of election, that all of a sudden that's the end of their private kind of exemption. Because if you are working in this election that will be in a number of days from now, and you say make lawn signs, those lawn signs have disclaimers on them. Hi, I'm Ted Cruz, or hi, I'm Kamala Harris, or whoever, right? That's public money that has to be reported to the FEC. So if Google and Facebook want to sit there and play in the elections, and they're doing it without reporting their activity, they are no longer in the private company space. They are in the public space, the election space. So if Facebook wants to go out and register emails or messages to only certain people, there's a monetary value, and that is playing in the election. And any other vendor, a private company who plays in the election would be under federal regulations to have to report that. So if they're doing that kind of activity, which we think they are, then that kind of ends that private company mantra that they like to hide behind. And so does CDA 230. If Facebook wants to sit there and censor people, then you're a media company, because 100 million people are reading news on Facebook. They only get their news from. How are they different than the New York Times? They have a much broader reach. They pick and choose their stories like the New York Times. So why should they be exempt? Everybody is following the rules in the media. Everybody, except for Facebook and Google, because of this exemption.
Well, I think you raise a very good point when it comes to, the accountability of what things are posted on their platforms, and that, I guess a lot of people or younger people might not necessarily know this, but, the FCC has all these rules and regulations for television and for radio, especially, right?
Oh, and, absolutely.
I mean, you could have made the same argument for them and said, okay, well, NBC, whatever, in 1935 or whatever, 1940, it was, shouldn't NBC, which is a private company, which even created a lot of the towers, the radio towers, right? I mean, could you have made the same argument, said, oh, well, they're a private company, but look at how the government interacted with them. They said, you can't do this, you can't do that. And they had all these rules and regulations. And I feel like, now with what you're mentioning with Google is that, it's bigger, or it's just as big as when, radio was dominating houses. Now you have Google in every house, following every family member that can basically read or has a device of some kind. And it's like, it just seems like it's a Wild West almost, where they just they can do whatever they want to on a whim, and they have all this information. And it seems like they skirt between two different things. They say, oh, we're not going to censor you, or, we're protected if somebody posts things that we don't necessarily agree with. So let's say, somebody makes a video on YouTube and says something like, whatever, some kind of shooting event didn't happen or something like that, right? Or just something that would be considered out of mainstream thought or as controversial. Then like you're saying, Google hides behind this, says, oh, well, we don't censor people. But then they censor other people. They unindex your website, or in the case of Alex Jones, they take him off the platforms. And it's like...
Sure.
And I mean, even if you don't like Alex Jones, it's like, well, what was the process behind getting rid of him, and is there a slippery slope,
Well, there is a slippery slope. I mean, look, and I'm not endorsing Alex Jones or, any of these things. I mean, I think it's like this. Like, if you have some kind of rules that you want to censor people or take things down, then just let everybody know. Like, that's fine. Look, it's fine. And actually, it's interesting because Alex Jones was first taken down by Apple, right? Apple hit him first. And the thing about Apple is that Apple, they're consignment. They don't sell. The media is not their thing, so they actually can take him down. you know. But these other platforms like Twitter and things that they who are exempt from these kinds of things because it's supposed to Craigslist is another one that's with CDA 230. You can do whatever you want on Craigslist. They don't alter anything. But people are starting to rethink that because what happens, people find people on Craigslist and then murder them, or something weird like that. And so people have been rethinking the exemptions, the free-for-alls, But I think ultimately, if these companies have some kind of slant or they have some kind of idea or purpose or vision for the world, I think it's their responsibility to let us know. Because you're right, Apple is a private company, but guess what? They still got to register the phone before they can sell them, with the FCC. So everybody has to regulate who's a private company is under some kind of rules. Nobody gets to have no rules. And so Google wants to have their cake and eat it too, essentially.
Do you think that is there an actual political slant amongst the people in Google, like the people that actually control and lead Google, and does it actually show itself, let's say, in practice on their platforms?
I am very careful about ascribing any kind of motive to people that I don't know. And I think it's like this, if you have a company that is all Democrats, will the company slant towards Democrats? I mean, no. I mean, a lot of companies won't. I mean, nobody asked what the political leaning is in Microsoft. Has anyone ever asked that? Because they make Windows and Microsoft Office, and that can be used, believe it or not, Windows can be used by Democrats and Republicans alike, So in certain sectors, I don't really think it matters. I think it's more, if you want to know where the slant comes in, if you can look at the material that has leaked out of Google. You can look at kind of how they reacted to the 2016 election. You can look at the Good Censor document that came out. And that will, but again, I think people should be able to vote and donate to whoever they want to. And I think that, just because a company is full of one kind of person slanting one way or another, I think the problem comes when those people en masse control the information sector, and so if they are controlling the information sector, there needs to be transparency so that there is not bias being introduced without us knowing. And because look, if you make something, if you create something, your kind of ethics and your morals and your kind of worldview is ingrained in what you make, whether it's a painting or it's code. You have an ethic there in things that are in the DNA of what you create. That's how creators work, And so I think that if there is a bias that is introduced into the product, we just need transparency to know that it's happening, and that's fine. If MSNBC makes no bones about which way they lean, and Fox makes no bones about which way they lean, but that's the difference. It, and you can choose. It's about choice. If I lean this way, I can choose that, and I lean that way, I can choose that. If I lean no way, I can choose both. But you can't let Google make those decisions for you and then claim that they're not making those decisions for you.
So far up until this point, we've primarily spoken about Google. Obviously, your film, The Creepy Line, also talks about Facebook. I guess what are some weird, or for lack of a better term, I guess sketchy or creepy things that Facebook knows about you, and how does it interact with your data on that platform?
I think Facebook is I think there's a lot of similarities between Google and Facebook, but they're also very different platforms. I think Facebook can be more creepy in kind of some of their kind of motives that they've been caught in. So, for example, I think maybe last year or 2 years ago, we featured this story in our film where they were doing experiments on depressed teenagers, because with the information they collect from teenagers, because it's a platform that's used widely by teenagers, they were able to identify who was like, depressed, and they would sit there and give them depressing stories to see what they would do. I find that to be absolutely disgusting, actually. That was an active thing that they did just to see what would happen. That's a very kind of they're experimenting on their customers. Like, who does that? And that's the one they were caught on. Because look, for every incident I bring up, for everything they get caught for, there's like a whole bunch of other stuff they didn't get caught for, and so that is probably what they do with your children. I think is probably kind of the most despicable kind of thing that Facebook does. I mean, let's not forget like where Facebook came from. The origins are very different than Google, where Sergey Brin was interested in, and Larry Page were interested in links and building like a better world. I mean, Facebook kind of started as a hot or not platform. Like that's kind of its origins in a way. It wasn't the utopian kind of view that say that Google had. It was more of a college student's kind of rating of women. In the Me Too movement, I'm surprised this doesn't come up more often. And so, to me, Facebook has always been kind of more of a creepier platform for what it does more overtly than say Google, which is more kind of infrastructural.
Well, I mean, I guess that kind of leads to another question in that with Google's hands are in so many different things that it's hard to necessarily pin down how they, let's say, make money, right? I mean, at the end of the day, all these corporations, they're making money, right? And I mean,
lots.
For Google, I mean, yeah, they've got their hands in a lot of pies, largely we're getting advertiser money. And I feel like for Facebook, like isn't that the only way they make money is when you promote, like when you basically pay for your business or your corporation, when you pay to run ads on Facebook, is that the only way they make money, or do they have other means too of making money?
Well, they're selling your data again. I mean, this is, and then on top of it, these are also, flipping back to Google real quick. I mean, like, these are the biggest media buyers in the world now. Google. Where do you run ads? You run ads in Google or you run ads on Facebook. And so, again, the way those ads work is by them selling you the data so that you can target the people who, want to buy your product. And again, they keep encouraging you to keep giving them more information so they can fine tune those platforms. So, that is, I think it's like this. At the end of the day, to come up with a solution for this, it's not about regulatory kind of movements or antitrust. Those are kind of old solutions for old companies. And that works with Microsoft. It doesn't work with Google and Facebook. We have to rethink their actual business model, which is the collecting of your data. How do you do a search engine that works well without taking your information and without exploiting you? And so I think that's really kind of the fundamental rethinking. How do you build a business without exploiting people in the 21st century? And so without selling them and buying them and these kinds of things. And that's really the only way to really fix this kind of problem. I mean, you can regulate it if you want, or you can break them in half, or you can call them a public utility, or you can, but that doesn't change the fact that they'll just adapt to those things and continue to, guess what? Surveil. That's what they do. That's what they're designed to do. And so until that surveillance capitalism model is rethought or eliminated, we're probably not going to change much in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, with Facebook, I mean, I guess a major difference between them and Google, like what you mentioned with breaking up, is that, with Google, I mean, I'm not, like we've talked about this earlier, it might not be necessarily easy to break them up, but I can conceptualize how you would do that to an extent, right? I mean, even though they're so interconnected, I can kind of envision. But with Facebook, and maybe I'm just not well versed enough about Facebook to say, but I feel like with them, I mean, I can only think of if they broke up Facebook, I mean, what would that even tangibly look like? I mean, obviously Instagram would be its own company, I guess, let's say. But I mean, with Facebook itself, I mean, it has, I don't know how many active users in the U.S., whatever, like 200 million or whatever it is, or 190, whatever the number is.
Insane number. Yeah, it's a massive number.
Yeah. I mean,
More people than people who vote for the president. You
yeah.
know?
And I mean, with Facebook though, I mean, like, how would you break that up? I mean, if people are on Facebook and they're interacting with Facebook, I mean, what would you do? I mean, would you break it up into one company called Face, another called Book, and they have caps to the number of people on the platforms? I mean, you couldn't really do that per se. I mean, that would I don't know how that would even look.
Well, look at how they're rethinking Instagram, right? Or even WhatsApp. You know, WhatsApp has popped up again lately as a problem. You know, as people are fleeing Facebook, and what are they doing? They're jumping to another platform. Well, to keep the gasoline in the engine, which is, guess what, your data, you know, they'll shift their resources over to Instagram. So Instagram, you'll be using it and posting your photos. What's happening on Instagram? Every 1 out of 5 photos I see is an ad. Well, where did they, you know, how are they advertising? It's because they're collecting my data, right? And so whereas Instagram used to be a really cool platform to share neat photos with your friends, it is now a surveillance platform. And if you know, Zuckerberg wants to add ads to WhatsApp, well, that's a huge problem, because guess what? WhatsApp's supposed to be end-to-end encryption, and if you're adding ads, that means you're collecting data, and hence it's not end-to-end anymore. And so, you know, it's kind of one of those things where it still goes back to that business model. You know, so yeah, I could move to another platform, but they could buy the platform and continue the same business practices over there. You know, and so again, the motivation is to collect your data and to surveil you. And it doesn't matter if you could use any platform. You could call it something else. As long as they are doing that, they still have that manipulation capability. And so that's the issue. Like, you know, I mean, look, like, obviously Tim Cook came out with his article because, again, Apple is like really trying to use this to their advantage, you know, of saying privacy and data is really important. We don't collect your data. That, you know, they made a big deal in the Apple event this week in Brooklyn about, you know, the Enclave chip that's built into the machine, so that, you know, we don't get your fingerprint, or we don't get your, you know, it never comes back to Apple. You know, they make a big deal about, you know, messages don't come back to Apple. So if the police wants to subpoena the records, we never got them, so there's nothing to turn over. You know, and that matters. I think that matters a lot. Like, that's not their business model. It's different. You know, now, will Apple get into collecting data at some point? You know, I mean, they do collect some data. Siri obviously goes back to Apple, and some people even think Siri sits on top of Google. But, you know, the thing is it's a fundamental business model issue that's causing all these problems.
Earlier this year, when Mark Zuckerberg, when he went in front of the Senate committee, whatever, when the hearing happened, they asked him, they said, oh, you know, is there a competitor to Facebook, like a legitimate competitor? Do you think that in the United States, at least, is there an actual legitimate competitor to Facebook in terms of actual market share and people using the platform?
No way. Absolutely no way. I mean, like,
Yeah.
look, like, let's be honest. You know, if you were given like 4 apps to put on your phone, like, ever, right? Most likely one of them is going to be Facebook, because how else would you know what grandma's up to without having to talk to her, right? How would you know? You know, you'd probably install Google Maps. You'd probably install, you know, Facebook, and unfortunately Facebook Messenger, you know, because it's a separate app, and maybe Uber. Or you know, or Seamless, or whatever, you know, depends on what city you live in. But I think that at the end of the day, like, no, there's no competitor to them, and if there were, they probably could buy them or find some way to partner with them and continue collecting your data.
I think something too that's often misunderstood about the fight on social, let's say for market share of social media sites, is that, I mean, everybody knows, oh, Facebook is big and everybody knows Instagram is big, but I feel like with Twitter, there's a perception that just because all these celebrities are on there and all these brands are on there, and it's very good, you know, in a Google search to see what someone's tweeting. I mean, that shows up oftentimes in a Google search, and you know, it seems like if you want to promote a message, Twitter's a very good place for that. But I feel like what kind of happens with that is that there's a little bit of a misconception or a disbelief or whatever that that basically Twitter is a lot bigger than it actually is. It seems like for Twitter, there's not a lot of your average people are on there really interacting with the platform the same way as Facebook. At least for myself and other people I've spoken to in this research that I've just seen and done. Like, for Facebook, you are seeing people that you actually know in real life posting things at places that you probably recognize, You see somebody at the movie theater with other people that and it's very tangible. Whereas, you go on Twitter and you see something like, Magic Johnson's tweets or James Woods' tweets. And these are people, at least for myself, I don't know who they are. I've never met Magic Johnson or James Woods. I mean, I know who they are from a professional standpoint, but I can't tell you their favorite color or where they like to eat dinner. But
no, absolutely, yeah.
I think there's the perception where it's like, oh yeah, well, even though Facebook is so big and Instagram's so big, Twitter's also so big, so it kind of counterbalances it. And is that really the case? Because in my mind, I definitely do not believe that Twitter is anywhere near in the same league as Facebook.
No, definitely not.
In terms of users, Twitter, at least, yeah.
Yeah, no. Twitter was a really revolutionary tool, I think, for news and things. I mean, imagine you go way back to 2008, a million years ago in tech world, and you got somebody who's in a Senate hearing, and they tweet out what the senator says to a bunch of people. It was an amazing thing to see, right? It wasn't, because who wants to watch C-SPAN? You're just getting the highlights or a debate or things that were. I think Twitter is really fascinating for how people were able to kind of get aggregated ideas instantaneously and simultaneously across many users. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, the familiarity of Facebook. I mean, look, again, these products work. They work great. They totally work. That's why we use them. That's why we have them. It's why people are like, oh, I'm gonna give up Facebook, and they can't do it. It's impossible. It's why you're watching something and you're served a video from College Humor or Funny or Die or epic fails, and what happens? You start watching, and then an hour later, you've basically done nothing but watch epic fails. And you're constantly seeing what people are posting, and it's Halloween, so there's just all these things that are happening. And I think the FOMO, fear of missing out, kicks in, and you kind of want to interact, and it's a cool platform. But yeah, I think Twitter's really great for information if you subscribe to the right people. So if you want to know about something that's happening, I think Twitter being used to coordinate people for first responders and disasters is amazing. Being able to sit there and be tweet, we need fire trucks over here, and these are cool. It's a cool platform for that. But it's not. It's more like an actionable platform, whereas Facebook is kind of like a lounge where you just kind of hang out.
I mean, I'm not sure if your film necessarily talks about Twitter that much, but I mean, in my mind, Twitter, there is something very positive to that, like what you mentioning that it is kind of, this is what's happening in the world, or this is Donald Trump tweets about the Dodgers general manager, Dave Roberts, right? And it's oh, that's kind of cool, and you probably wouldn't have seen that on Facebook. If Donald Trump was actually active on Facebook, they obviously, just because of how they work the algorithms, they want you to pay to actually see, have your posts seen by people if you're a brand or a business, right? But yeah, on Twitter, it's oh, he says this thing about Dave Roberts, and it's out there, or whoever, they tweet something, and you look and you're like, oh, okay, like that. Oh gosh, I wish I remembered her name. The woman that said that Trump has radicalized more people than ISIS. She was on CNN a week ago. I mean, you can see her actual response, her unedited response on Twitter, right? She tweeted, basically kind of it wasn't even an apology. It was just an explanation of why she said what she said. But it's she can post that and just say directly how she feels, or anybody can on Twitter. But yeah, your average person, like you said, your aunt that has an office type of job and isn't a celebrity or isn't trying to be a celebrity, I mean, what would she even really post on Twitter? I mean, is she gonna post hot takes on the news or sports or a movie?
No, I mean, well, that's the thing. I mean, I find difficulty finding what I would post on Twitter, and I do these things, like it's I as an information, look, that the presidency is, is very much linked to Twitter. It's whether you like or dislike the president, he's very transparent via Twitter. It's an interesting kind of cultural phenomena. But again, I do think they're fundamentally different. These platforms, I think Google, Facebook, and Twitter, they're all very different from each other. But one of the things that kind of links them all together, whether besides the math and the algorithms, is the fact that they are the arbiters of content. And that's really the ultimate kind of thing. Whether it's they can censor content, they can allow content to ebb and flow. And I think that is where it's important that we know what they're up to, so that people aren't getting censored, or they're transparent with that, like, yeah, we're going to censor people, and that, as opposed to, again, pretending to be neutral platforms, which they are not.
So I wanted to ask you just a little bit before we have to go, about the film Creepy Line. Like, who are some people that are in it? I saw that Jordan Peterson was involved with the film, and I just want to ask you a little bit about some of the. I mean, I don't know if they're guest stars. I don't know necessarily how you would build them, but yeah, like if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the film itself, like its length, where we can see it, when it's out, and maybe some of the people that were involved with the filming of it.
Absolutely. So the Creepy Line is I believe it's 82 minutes. It's available on Amazon and iTunes right now. And we have some select screenings around the country. We had one in San Diego last night. There's one in Chicago in a few weeks. And the film interviews a number of people. It's not a partisan film. It's a film that's about these companies. It's a mixed group of people. So we have Luther Lowe from Yelp. We have Dr. Robert Epstein, who is one of the world's kind of preeminent Google people, tracking Google, unpacking their technology, looking under the hood. He actually tracked the 2016 presidential election without Google knowing for over 6 months, saving all the ephemera that comes through as with the auto suggestions and various things. And he actually learned how to compute bias. He came up with an engine that can tell you if one of these companies is being biased within minutes. And so we also have Peter Schweitzer, the author of Clinton Cash, is in the film. Brad Shear, who is a lawyer who has tangled with Google, primarily on the idea of Google and Facebook in education and with children. And he's been filing these things to help protect kids. Because look, if Facebook is collecting information about your kids, and then that information is being sold to insurance companies or universities, that's not just creepy, it's also discriminatory in a way. So these are the kinds of people who are in the film, and they bring their expertise to talk about the various kinds of their topics. Especially, of course, there's Jordan Peterson, who was a victim of censorship on Google. And his story is interesting because when they shut his YouTube down, they shut down his calendar, his email, everything got shut down. So if you offend Google in any way, and by the way, there's no customer service, so there's no one to call to find out what you did or how to turn it back on, everything gets shut down. So if your business runs on these platforms, you're locked out for as long as they see fit. So we covered that in the film as well. And of course, we break down Dr. Robert Epstein, who was banned from Google.com. He couldn't actually go to www.google.com because he wrote an article criticizing Google. And then we break down his research, where he kind of explains how the search engine can manipulate you, and the results he had from his experiments, and ultimately tracking the 2016 presidential election.
Wow. And how long did it take for you to make the film itself?
The film was in production for a year.
Okay.
Roughly, about a year from last month. It was October 2017, where the camera started rolling in San Diego.
Wow. Do you think your next film will have something to do with tech-related companies, or are you going to go in a totally different field, or a totally different genre, or not genre, but a totally different topic?
I'll probably go on a totally different topic. I mean, I have lots of different interests. I look, my interest in the creepy line is not just because I want transparency. I love technology. I really do. And again, I definitely don't want to stifle innovation. I definitely, Google and Facebook did lots of really great things for humanity in a lot of ways. But I'm concerned about some of these later activities they've been involved in. But again, I have a lot of interest. I have a lot of different topics I'm interested in outside of technology. So I'll probably look towards something completely different. But we'll be taking the movie to a variety of places. Hopefully certain government officials will want to see the information in the film to help them, because again, we don't want any kind of regulatory interaction that would be damaging to innovation or the economy as well. So I think that depending on where the government goes after the midterm, I know that the various sides have different plans, and so we hope to be part of that conversation, so that people do good for the people who use the platforms, and also do good for the companies.
And just for yourself, how can people follow the work that you're doing, like your website or your Twitter account?
You can go to www.thecreepyline.com.
Okay.
We are also releasing, and I believe we've released a bunch of it already, probably 30 to 40 minutes of additional content that's not in the film, that's actually on our YouTube. So you can go to our YouTube, The Creepy Line, and see a couple trailers. You can see additional content from the various people in the film. You can see a whole bunch of different narratives where we talk about the FTC, and we talk about, again, we expand on a number of the topics in the film with short clips and various pieces. We talk about the EU. We talk about again, expanding on children and how these platforms can affect your children. And then a number of clips from Jordan Peterson talking about trust and trusting companies, and kind of the philosophy of these companies, and what does it all mean. So there's a lot of additional material to see and watch, to help you, get informed and share if you like, and, hopefully use these platforms with more skepticism and more caution.
All right. Well, definitely. That sounds very good, Matthew. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm definitely going to check out the film, and I appreciate your time for coming on.
It's my pleasure. I had a wonderful time today. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, take care.
All right. You too. Thank you.
All right. Bye.